My family had already finished dinner by the time I walked into my parents' 35th anniversary. Plates were cleared, glasses full, laughter loud without me. Then Mom slid a $200 bill across the table. My sister smirked. "You're our ATM." Everyone laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I didn't laugh. I tore the bill in half, left the room, and swore I was done. But 4 months later, the bank called me, and what I learned cut deeper than any joke at that table. I'm Ethan Hale, and this is my story. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel. Every voice, every listener makes a difference, and sometimes knowing you're here helps carry the weight of telling it. By the time I finally pushed through the glass doors of Cedar Vine, my parents' 35th anniversary was already wrapping up. Portland had thrown its worst at me that night. Hail pounding the windshield brake lights stacked like a red river on I-5, and I walked in nearly 70 minutes late, soaked, despite the umbrella, my pulse still racing from the storm outside. Inside, the light was warm and golden, the kind of glow meant for celebration. But when I entered the private dining room, it felt less like walking into a family gathering and more like stumbling into a party where my name had been left off the guest list. Plates were pushed aside, forks clinked against dessert bowls, and laughter rolled around the table. My chair sat untouched, the napkin still folded, not a single dish in front of me. That's always been my place in the Hale family, present but not accounted for. My father, Robert, manager at Summit Bank, kept up his perfect banker's image, never a hair out of place. My mother, Linda, balanced numbers and appearances with equal precision. And my sister, Ashley, well, she was the family's crowning achievement, a partner at a Portland law firm, married to Eric, a surgeon with a flawless smile. They brought along their photogenic kids, Olivia and Jack, who had already learned how to parrot adult sarcasm. I forced a smile, stepped closer, and held out my gift, a silver-wrapped box containing matching Apple Watches, each engraved with their wedding date. My mother unwrapped it, admired the engraving with a polite nod, and set it aside without even fastening the strap. Olivia piped up. "Wait till you see what Aunt Ashley gave them." Ashley handed over an envelope, and within seconds, the room was electric. First-class tickets to Bahamas, a suite at the Grand Hyatt, the promise of sun and sand. My mother cried. My father slapped Eric on the back like he'd just saved a life. The whole table buzzed with plans of beaches and luau while my box sat forgotten on the sideboard. Then came the moment that cracked something inside me. My mother smoothed the dinner bill across the white tablecloth over $200 and slid it toward me. "Ethan, you could take care of this. Think of it as your contribution to the celebration." Before I could react, Ashley chuckled. "Come on, he's the family ATM." Laughter exploded around the table. Everyone joined in, even the kids, as if my role had been permanently stamped on my forehead. I didn't laugh. I pulled $250 in cash from my wallet, my share for a meal I hadn't even eaten, set it down, and stared at the bill until the room blurred. Then I tore it in half, then in quarters, shredding it into confetti that rained across the table. The laughter died. I straightened my jacket and walked out without another word. That single act, tearing a bill, wasn't just about money. It was about breaking the role they'd assigned me, the role I never wanted. And for the first time in years, I felt the crack of something new forming defiance. Growing up, I'd always known my seat at the table was different. Dinner conversations orbited around Ashley trophies, her straight A's, her scholarships. My report cards littered with B's drew sighs, and that inevitable question, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" My sketches that won local contests were called cute hobbies, while her debate victories warranted celebratory dinners. The subtext was clear. Achievement meant prestige, and prestige was all that counted in the Hale household. 4 years ago, everything shifted. On a whim, while buying coffee in Sunnyside, I picked up a lottery ticket. Against all odds, I won $220,000. Not life-changing riches, but enough to breathe again. I paid off student loans, bought new equipment for my design work, built a safety net. I hadn't meant to tell anyone, but during one family dinner, my mother asked why I seemed so relaxed lately. Without thinking, I let it slip. Their attention flipped overnight. Suddenly, I was included in group texts, invited on vacations, asked to join weekly dinners. For a brief moment, I believed maybe they'd finally accepted me. But it didn't take long to see the pattern. Every warm gesture was just a prelude to a request. It started with my dad. His car broke down and he needed just a small loan until his bonus came in. $8,000 later, there was no mention of repayment. When I brought it up, he looked wounded and reminded me they'd paid for my college. "Family helps family," he said. Then Ashley asked for $5,000 so Olivia could attend a prestigious summer camp even though she and Eric had just returned from a ski trip in Sun River. My mother wanted money for a kitchen renovation. Eric hinted at an investment opportunity. Even the kids chimed in. Olivia asked for a drawing tablet, Jack for a new computer. The biggest ask came when the roof at the Sandy River cabin collapsed. "It's our family's gathering place," they said. I handed over $24,000 to fix it. And through it all, I never heard a genuine thank you. Looking back, the signs were there all along. Every request was wrapped in ribbons of obligation masked as love. And every time I gave, I hoped they might finally see me not as the family wild card, not as the disappointment, but as someone worthy of belonging. Instead, I became their unspoken safety net, the ATM in human form. By the time that anniversary dinner rolled around, I should have known better. But part of me still wanted a seat at the table. Part of me still believed a watch engraved with love might mean more than a trip to Bahamas. That illusion shattered the moment they laughed. And when I tore that bill apart, I wasn't just rejecting their joke. I was rejecting years of being bought and sold under the guise of family love. The night I ripped that bill in half, something inside me split too. I walked out of Cedar Vine with my pulse pounding and the sound of their laughter still echoing in my ears. For days afterward, I stared at my phone every time it lit up, waiting for someone to reach out with even a flicker of remorse. Instead, the messages rolled in like nothing had changed. My mother texted about the cabin roof again, asking if I could chip in a little more since you care so much about keeping family memories alive. My sister wanted me to buy Olivia a new iPad since you're good with technology and she looks up to you. My father wrote as if it were a simple afterthought. "Since you missed the dinner, you might consider sending us some spending money for Bahamas. It would be a nice gesture." Each request was wrapped in soft words, but the undertone was as sharp as ever. My role hadn't shifted in their eyes. I was still the machine they could press for cash. At first I felt guilty. I replayed the scene at the restaurant 100 times, wondering if I'd overreacted, wondering if tearing the bill was childish. Sleepless nights followed the silence between us growing heavier until I finally reached for help outside my family. That's how I met Dr. Nora Collins, a therapist who specialized in family boundaries. Sitting across from her in her quiet office with soft lamps and books lining the shelves, I finally let words spill out. I'd never said aloud that my family loved me, only when my wallet was open that my achievements were dismissed unless they came with a receipt. She listened carefully, then said something that burrowed into my chest. "You're not just grieving the relationship you lost. You're grieving the relationship you never had." That sentence hit harder than I expected. It explained the hollow ache, the longing that never seemed to fade. I hadn't lost a real bond. I had lost the illusion of one. I tried to fill the silence with something healthier. I joined an art collective in Kenton, where walls splashed with murals and warehouses turned into studios breathed new life into me. It was there I met Grace Kim, a photographer who had moved from Phoenix. Over late-night coffee and gallery openings, we shared stories. One night when I finally opened up about my family, she leaned back thoughtful. "My parents cut me off when I switched my major from business to photography," she said flatly. "It wasn't support, it was control. Once I stopped following their script, the money disappeared." Hearing someone else frame it so clearly cracked something open in me. Maybe what I'd mistaken for love was always a transaction, a way to steer me to keep me tethered. Grace didn't flinch when she said it, and for the first time, I felt less alone. I began to think maybe I could rebuild my life on new terms. Nights in Kenton felt lighter than nights at the family table ever had. But just as the weight began to lift, a call came that yanked me back into the darkness. It was an ordinary afternoon in my Sunnyside apartment, sunlight streaming across my desk when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was clipped professional and heavy with something I couldn't yet name. By the time he introduced himself as a credit manager from Northwest First Bank, I felt my stomach knot. He told me there had been an application for a $30,000 line of credit in my name. My pulse hammered. I hadn't opened anything new. When I asked who the co-signer was, he read the name without hesitation. Robert Hale, my father. That morning had started like any other. I was working on a design project for a Portland startup. Headphones and coffee cooling beside me when the call came through. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in the area code made me answer. The man introduced himself as Mark Ellison, Senior Credit Manager at Northwest First Bank. His tone was steady but edged with gravity. "Mr. Hale, our system flagged an application in your name. A $30,000 credit line with your social security number and date of birth. But the signature verification failed. I need to confirm. Did you apply for this account?" The room tilted. I said, "No, I hadn't." Silence crackled on the line for a beat before he continued. The primary applicant listed as joint on the account was Robert Hale. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My father, who had lectured me since childhood about the sanctity of trust, about how credit was reputation made tangible, had used my name to claw for money. My throat tightened. Ellison cleared his throat gently. "This may be difficult to hear, but our investigation suggests this wasn't an isolated incident. In the past 3 months, there have been multiple inquiries tied to your identity at different institutions. They were all flagged, but the pattern is concerning." I pressed my hand against the desk, trying to anchor myself as his words echoed. This wasn't a one-time mistake, not a desperate slip. It was a system of repeated attempt. My father hadn't just asked for help, he had crossed into theft. My body shook with a strange mix of anger and grief. A loan unpaid was one thing, but stealing my identity using the documents that defined me was another. And worse, this was the man who once wore pressed suits and polished shoes, who sat at our dinner table and said a person's word was everything. Ellison walked me through the steps, freeze my credit with all 3 bureaus, reset my passwords, set up fraud alerts, open a P.O. box to reroute sensitive mail. He mentioned the possibility of filing a police report. His voice calm, leaving the decision in my hands. I thanked him, though the words felt brittle in my mouth. When I hung up, the silence in my apartment roared. I tried to replay where it might have happened. And then it struck me. The last time I'd been at the family house, I'd left my document folder in the study for a few minutes while I helped my mother in the kitchen. My chest went cold. That must have been when he made copies. I stood in the middle of my living room, heart pounding, the city moving quietly beyond the windows. For years I had felt like the odd one out the overlooked sun. For years they had used me for money. But this was no longer about family squabbles or guilt-tripped generosity. This was criminal. It was not just my savings or my time they wanted. It was my name, my future, my very identity. And it was my own father who had tried to take it. The morning after the call from the bank, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank screen. My first instinct had been to drive straight to my parents' house and demand an explanation. But the memory of every past confrontation stopped me. I knew exactly how it would go. Raised voices, guilt shifting to blame until I walked out feeling like the villain. Dr. Nora Collins' words echoed in my head. If you meet them face to face, they will twist the story. Write it down. Keep the control. So I opened a new email and my fingers began to move. I wrote to all of them. My father, my mother Sloan, Daniel, even Aunt Patricia. The subject line was stark. What I know. I laid it all out. That I had proof from the bank that my father had tried to open a credit line in my name. That this was not just a mistake, but a crime. That I was choosing out of respect for the family name not to file charges for now. But the decision came with a price I would not give another cent to anyone. Not for trips, not for camps, not for cars or houses. I told them plainly, if you continue to excuse him or deny this, I will cut off contact. I refuse to play the family ATM any longer. I read it back twice, my chest heavy, then hit send. For a long while, nothing came. Then the replies trickled in each one, revealing exactly what I had feared. My father did not respond at all. His silence was louder than any denial. Ashley's reply arrived, next long and blistering. She accused me of overreacting, of blowing up the family over what she called a misunderstanding. Her words dripped with contempt. What kind of son calls his own father a criminal? You are destroying us. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Please meet me. Just the two of us. There are things you do not know. Aunt Diane's email was gentler, her disappointment clear but misplaced. I am shocked, Ethan. I cannot imagine your father doing something like this, but I beg you all to keep the family together. Do not let this tear us apart. I leaned back in my chair, reading them over and over. Even with evidence in hand, they chose to deny, deflect, and protect the image of a perfect family. My father's silence, my sister's rage, my mother's plea for a private meeting. Every response proved the same thing. The truth wasn't welcome if it threatened the facade. That night, my phone lit up again. A missed call from my mother followed by a voicemail. Her voice trembled as she said, Ethan, your father has secrets I never told you. Please meet me, just us. I sat in the dark, the city lights outside flickering like distant stars, my mind torn. Part of me wanted to shut the door for good, but another part, the part that had spent years craving even a shred of honesty, needed to know what she might say. I chose Director Park for the meeting, the grand old hall that had been polished into Portland's living room. I sat at a cafe table near the door, a place where I could walk out if things turned ugly. The trains hissed and clattered behind me, commuters weaving past while I nursed a coffee I barely touched. When my mother finally arrived, I hardly recognized her. Linda Hale, always immaculate now, looked worn down. Her hair was unbrushed. Her blazer wrinkled, her eyes lined with fatigue. She slid into the chair across from me, clutching a napkin like it was a lifeline. Ethan, she began, her voice small. I'm sorry. I didn't know your father took your papers. I would never have allowed that. I looked at her steadily. But you knew he and everyone else treated me like a wallet. Her lips tightened, but she didn't deny it. She only dropped her gaze fingers, twisting the napkin. For a long moment she said nothing, and I wondered if she would retreat back into excuses. Then in a whisper she admitted what I hadn't dared to imagine. Your father has been gambling for years, she said. Casinos, cards, sports betting. It's been worse than I ever let on. We're drowning in debt. The house has been refinanced twice. The money we asked from you, it wasn't for extras. It was to cover his losses. The words landed like stones in my chest. All those requests, new cars, summer camps, kitchen renovations, had been masks for a deeper rot. She took a shaky breath. I encouraged him. I told him you were single, that you had money saved, that helping us was what family does. I thought it was harmless. Harmless, I repeated. You pushed him to drain me because I don't have a spouse or kids, because you decided my life was less valuable." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. "Yes, I suppose I did." I pressed harder. "And Ashley, did she know?" My mother hesitated, then said quietly, "She knows, but she refuses to acknowledge it. She's built her life around pretending everything is fine. If she admits the truth, her world cracks too." I sat back staring at the woman who had raised me, the woman who had smiled as she handed me bills and called it family duty. The betrayal cut deep, but strangely there was also a strange clarity in hearing her admit it. At least now I knew the script we had all been living. It wasn't just my father's addiction. It was complicity woven through every request, every shrug, every deflection. The trains rumbled through Director Park as I absorbed her words. My mother sat across from me, broken in ways I had never seen, and for the first time the curtain lifted. They hadn't just used me. They had built their fragile world on me, and they had all known it. I left the cafe with my chest aching. The sky above Portland Street with evening light. It was pain, yes, but also relief. The illusions were gone, and what remained was a truth I could no longer ignore. My family wasn't just flawed. They had all been complicit, and I was finally starting to see it clearly. It was close to midnight when my phone lit up with my father's name. For a long minute I stared at it, my hand hovering, debating whether to let it ring out. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice came through heavy but calm in that practiced way of his. "You've been talking to your mother, haven't you?" She exaggerates. "She always has. I didn't do anything wrong. I was only trying to help the family through a tough patch." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar pull of his words. But this time I didn't let them land. "You forged my name, Dad. That's not helping. That's theft." His tone sharpened. "If you hadn't won that money, none of this would have happened. Your mother wouldn't have gotten used to living beyond her means. She wouldn't have pushed for renovations or trips. You brought this temptation into the house." My chest tightened. Somehow I had become the root cause of his mistakes. He was rewriting the story with me as the villain. Then he shifted again, smooth and coaxing. "Look, you don't need to make this bigger than it is. Send money directly to your mother. Cut me out of it if you want. No one needs to know about this. We can move forward and pretend nothing happened." I steadied my voice. "The bank has evidence. Your signature didn't match mine. How do you explain that?" For a long few seconds, silence stretched. When he finally spoke, his voice had hardened into a growl. "Family doesn't drag family into court. If you go that route, if you expose me, you'll be the one who betrays us. Everyone will see you as the traitor." And then, faint in the background, I heard another voice. "My sisters don't waste your breath, Dad. He'll never understand." The sound hollowed me out. She was with him. They weren't just tolerating each other. They were united against me. It was no longer one man's addiction. It was a system reinforced, defended, excused. My hands shook as I ended the call. I sat there in the darkness of my apartment, Portland lights flickering beyond the glass, and I finally understood. I wasn't fighting one person. I was fighting an entire structure that had built itself on my silence and compliance. And I knew then that silence would no longer be my role. When the message came that the family wanted to meet at the Sandy River cabin to resolve things, I hesitated only once. That cabin had swallowed $24,000 of mine for a new roof. If there was ever a courtroom for our family, it was there. I printed a letter, folded it neatly, and slid it into an envelope. It was time to put the truth on the table in a way no one could twist. The night air smelled of pine when I pulled up. Inside the cabin glowed with the firelight I had once paid to keep from leaking smoke through a broken chimney. They were already gathered around the long wooden table. My parents at the head, Ashley and Eric on one side, the kids restless in the corner. My mother's eyes were red, my father's jaw set like stone. I placed the envelope on the table, opened it, and began to read. My voice didn't shake. The bank has proof that Robert Hale forged my identity. This isn't suspicion, it's documented. And while we're naming debts, let's be precise. $8,000 for the car, $5,000 for Olivia Camp, $24,000 for this roof, $15,000 for Mom's bracelet, $200 for a dinner I didn't eat. Each time I gave because I thought it was love. But you've turned every gesture into a transaction. The room crackled with tension. My sister shot up from her chair, her voice sharp. Enough. Every family leans on each other. You're selfish, Ethan. Always have been. You think only about yourself. I faced her squarely when I was sick for weeks. Who checked on me when I landed my biggest contract? Who called to congratulate me? Not you. Not any of you. Family isn't one-sided. My father slammed his hand on the table and stood. If you cut us off, then don't you dare call us family. We won't claim you either. I held his gaze. You don't have to disown me. You did that years ago when you decided my worth was only in what I could provide. The air snapped when my mother broke. Her voice rose thick with tears. Stop, Robert. Stop pretending. We've all been lying. You've destroyed this family with your gambling, and I let it happen because I was too afraid to face the truth. She turned to me, her face crumpled. I'm sorry, son. Truly. For a moment, I just looked at her, seeing the cracks in the image she had held up for decades. Then I laid the letter flat on the table. This is the last line. Either you learn to respect me or you lose me. There's no middle ground. I turned toward the door behind me. No one spoke. Not Ashley, not my father, not even Eric with his smug certainty. The only sound was the fire popping in the hearth. The silence told me what I needed to know. They had no defense left. As I stepped outside into the cold mountain air, the weight on my shoulders shifted. It wasn't gone, but it was different. Heavier for the finality, lighter for the truth. And I knew as I walked away from that cabin, they were left inside with the wreckage of their own making. I had finally drawn the boundary, and for the first time it held. Rain streaked the windows of my Sunnyside apartment the night I came back from Sandy River Cabin. The streets below gleamed with neon reflections. But inside I sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down. My father's fury, my mother's tearful confession, my sister's contempt. All of it replayed in my head. I felt lighter for speaking my truth, but also hollow, as though the foundation of what I once called family had crumbled for good. For hours, I sat without moving, staring at the envelope I'd read from at the cabin. The fire had gone out behind me, but the words remained. This was the line, the final break, and I knew if I didn't act now, they'd find a way back in. So I called the bank, confirmed every detail. Yes, my father had attempted to use my name. Yes, his signature had failed authentication. Yes, the evidence was secure. I spent the next days locking every door that could be locked. I placed a credit freeze with all 3 bureaus, flagged my accounts with fraud alerts, opened a P.O. box across town so my mail wouldn't pass through the family house again. I changed every password, every PIN, every entry point into my life. With each step, I felt the wall rise higher, not against strangers, but against the people who should have been my safest place. The hardest choice was whether to involve the police. Dr. Nora Collins reminded me gently but firmly that I owed them no silence. But after long sessions' tears, I didn't expect I decided to stop short of pressing charges. It wasn't forgiveness. It was survival. If I dragged my father into court, the circus of denial and blame would never end. I chose instead to cut off the power at its source. No more access, no more money, no more name for them to use. I wrote one last message clear and without room for misinterpretation. From this point on, I will not provide financial support of any kind. If anyone contacts me about money, that contact will end. The only communication I will maintain is limited with Mom, and only if she is working toward change. These boundaries are not negotiable. I read it twice, then pressed send. The responses came fast. Ashley text lit my phone first. "You've destroyed this family over a few numbers on a page. Don't expect to see me again." I stared at her words, waiting for pain to flare, but nothing came. Instead, there was clarity. I wasn't losing her. I had never really had her. Later that night, my mother called, her voice breaking through the line. "I've joined a support group for families dealing with gambling addiction. I can't promise miracles, but I'm trying. Your father isn't ready. But I am." I listened quietly, then told her, "If you ever bring money into the conversation again, even once, I'll end contact. This is the last chance." She cried, but she agreed. When I hung up, I walked to the mirror. For the first time, I could meet my own reflection without shame. "I'm not your ATM," I whispered, steady and certain. "I'm me." The words were both a declaration and vow. The wall was built. Whatever storm came next, it would hold. 18 months later, I stood in a different place. I had left Sunnyside and moved into a sunlit loft and Nob Hill high ceilings and wide windows that bathed the rooms in morning light. On the walls hung canvases I'd painted, abstract bursts of color that carried pieces of nights too dark to name. The space felt alive, mine alone no longer an extension of the family ledger. My design studio had grown. Clients referred me to others' projects lined up months in advance. I split time between work and the Kenton Collective, where my art hung alongside murals and photographs. At openings, laughter and music filled the air, and for once I belonged without having to pay for admission. Grace Kim became more than a friend. We spent evenings walking galleries, trading stories about how we had untangled ourselves from the strings our parents pulled. She reminded me often that family could be chosen, that connection didn't need blood to be real. Around her, I felt lighter, as though the old scripts had finally loosened their grip. My father eventually entered a treatment program for gambling, though not because of me. I heard through my mother, who still called once a week, her voice softer, now filled with ordinary things. Recipes, she tried books, she'd read the weather. She no longer asked for money, not once. Ashley remained distant, sending only holiday texts with stiff greetings. It was better that way. One afternoon, my mother handed me a small box when we met briefly for coffee. Inside was the diamond bracelet I'd bought her years ago, the one she'd once paraded at parties as if it were proof of devotion. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "It should be yours again." I took it without anger, but I didn't put it on. I slipped it into a drawer when I got home. It wasn't a reminder of loss anymore, but of closure. The final scene of that year came at a restaurant tucked into a quiet Portland block. I sat alone at a corner table, a single candle flickering between me and the glass of champagne I'd ordered. I thought of Cedar Vine, of the humiliation of that night when they laughed at me as the bill slid across the table. I thought of the torn paper in my hands, the silence that followed the storm that came after. And then I raised my glass not for them, but for me. To boundaries, I said softly, and drank. What I had learned was simple but unshakable: love cannot be bought, and respect begins at the line you draw for yourself. I no longer chased their approval or confused my worth with what I could give away. I had found something more durable. In the quiet of that moment, I belonged to myself. And for the first time, that was enough. There are nights when I still hear their laughter in my head, the echo of that dinner when they called me the family ATM. I used to think those echoes meant I was broken, that I had to go back, fix things, give more until they finally saw me. But now I know those echoes are just the sound of old chains rattling, fading with time. Because what I've learned the hardest way possible is that silence is not peace. Compliance is not love, and giving until you're empty is not family. When I walked out of that cabin, when I put the letter down and drew my final line, I thought I was walking away from everything. And in a sense, I was. I was walking away from the illusion that family would change if I just gave a little more. I was walking away from the script they wrote for me. The script where my role was to pay to absorb blame, to never speak up. But the truth is, I wasn't walking away from family. I was walking toward myself. 18 months later, I sit here and realize the boundaries I set weren't walls that trapped me. They were doors. They opened into a life where I could breathe, where relationships were built on honesty instead of transactions, where the people in my life see me for who I am rather than what I can provide. I learned that sometimes family isn't the people you share blood with, but the people you share respect with. Grace, my friends at the Kenton Collective, even strangers who heard my story and said, "I've been there too." They became the chorus that replaced those echoes of laughter. If you've ever felt like the extra place at the table, like your value was measured in what you could give rather than who you are, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not alone. Your worth isn't tied to your wallet, your paycheck, or your sacrifices. Your worth exists because you do. And the moment you decide to draw that line, to say no to protect yourself, you are not destroying your family. You are saving yourself. And that's not selfish. That's survival. That's dignity. Looking back, I don't regret tearing that bill in half. At the time, it felt reckless. Now I see it as the first act of defiance, the spark that lit everything else. That shredded paper was my first real boundary, my first declaration that I was more than their running joke. Sometimes change starts in the smallest gestures, and sometimes it takes setting fire to the roles others force on you to step into the life you deserve. So I raise my glass again tonight, and every night not in bitterness, but in reclamation to boundaries, to the lines we draw that say, "This is where I end." And you begin to the courage it takes to walk away from those who refuse to respect you, and most of all to the quiet strength of learning to stand by yourself for yourself. If my story speaks to you, if you've seen your own reflection in my words, I hope you'll stay with me. Leave a simple comment, say hi, or tell me where you're watching from. Because every time I hear from you, it reminds me that none of us are as alone as we feel in those dark moments. And if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, not because numbers matter, but because connection does. Because when you click that button, you're not just following a story. You're joining a community of people who know what it's like to be underestimated, used, or dismissed, and who are learning piece by piece to reclaim their lives. Thank you for being here, for listening, for giving your time to my story. It matters more than you know. And if you take anything away from this, let it be this. You don't have to keep paying for a seat at someone else's table. Build your own set, your own boundaries, and invite in only those who see your worth without a price tag attached. That's what I did. That's what I'll keep doing. And maybe, just maybe, that's what you need too. To boundaries, to freedom, and to